Welcome to the JD Power Insurance Intelligence Podcast. I'm Michael Vermillion with JD Power, and with me today are Amy Feeman from JD Power. Welcome, Amy.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
We also have from the insurance practice, Mark Garrett. Welcome, Mark.
Yep. Hello, Mike.
And also Steve Crewdson from the JD Power insurance practice. Welcome, Steve.
Hi, Mike. Great to be back.
So our topic for today is insurance agents. And why don't we just set the stage by talking about the role and the importance of agents in the insurance market and the insurance customer experience. So, Steve, we know from JD Power research that consumers still have an appetite to work with agents.
Yeah, Mike, we do. We know that as we look out to the quotes that are happening among shoppers, that still a very large number of shoppers are getting quotes through an agent. And because agents, when any human being is involved in that quoting and binding process for an auto or homeowner's insurance policy, the policy is more likely to be sold than when it's just purely a digital experience. But specifically when an agent is involved, they really boost the close rate across the quotes that they provide. So they're selling more policies per quote that they provide than our other channels. And we also know with service, once a consumer becomes a customer of an insurer for their auto or home policy, they want a lot of their transactions, the more complex transactions, to still have an agent involved in that transaction. For instance, if, like many of us in the last couple of years, you've seen a steady stream of increases in your auto or homeowner's insurance premium, and you have questions around that, the majority of consumers want to talk to their agent about that. They want to talk to perhaps maybe a call center person, but still the majority want to talk to an agent and get feedback from their agent around why prices are going up, what they can do about those price increases. For the more simple transactions, maybe making a payment, downloading an auto insurance card, proof of insurance, they're happy to do that through a digital channel. But agents are still highly relevant in the industry, and they're critical for many of the more complex transactions.
Thanks, Steve. Amy, we also know from JD Power research that kind of the nature of that interaction between the consumer and the agent is important. So if the customer comes away feeling like they were satisfied with that interaction, I think our research shows that there's a higher likelihood to renew their policy, right?
Yeah, that is true, Mike. Actually, if you think about the relationship between customers and their agents, their customers are really thinking of their agents as kind of that intermediary or liaison between themselves and the insurer. So they're the person who would go to bat for them, make sure that everything goes smoothly, and sometimes that's kind of their first person that they would go to if they have a problem. And if they have a negative experience with their agent, not only are they less likely to stay with their agent or agency, they're also, like you said, less likely to stay with that insurer. So, the agent definitely is reflected, or the insurer is definitely reflected by the agent. And, if it's really in insurers' best interest to kind of empower agents and help them give the customers a good experience.
Mark, do agents have any kind of role these days when it comes to the claims experience?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's an interesting area that we've seen undergo quite a transition, I'd say, since we've really launched our claim studies probably in the last 15 years or so ago. I mean, we've seen, I think in the early days, we had a really high volume of claims being reported through the agents. Especially those big agency brands. I mean, we were seeing 60, 70% of the time, customers are starting with their agent. What do I do? Getting some peace of mind, getting some advice. And we've slowly seen that transition, where they're pushing a lot more digital tools now, much more heavy reliance on call centers. They can have more kind of control of what's being said and better scripting around that interaction. So I think, as I've kind of looked at this data over time, we went from, down to maybe half the time to 40 to 30, now we're seeing that, maybe even, and this is with the larger carriers, maybe about 20% of claims. Now it's about 1 in 5 customers are reporting through an agent. We still see, I think there are a couple outliers. I think there's maybe 2 brands that come to mind that are still getting maybe 30, 40% of claims reported through an agent, but the industry as a whole is down in the teens now. But that's averaging everybody that we profile, including direct carriers. But I mean, it's basically gone down by about a third, I'd say, in the last 10 years or so. But that's just kind of one point in time, right? Just as an example. So if and while they're trying to reduce that role of the agent, we still see customers contacting an agent, for advice. We still see later in the claim, the agent can still play a critical role. There's customers are contacting their agent. Again, we see those rates, around, in the 30s, 40% of the time. It just at some point, am I, reaching out to my agent just to kind of check in, get their point of view on things. We see that happening. We added some new content this year, which is kind of interesting. So we'd asked around kind of push or pull communications, like how does the brand keep you informed? How are you making any calls or any effort to look for information? And I mean, we see that customers are still, reaching out to their agents. It also highlights just, a real need for the industry to kind of keep those, agents informed, right? Give them channels to get updates and, get the claim information, handled. So we see that, being an opportunity, and certainly, the nature of why you're calling your agent. We see that, we see some things, if I'm calling my agent because I've got a problem or an issue, I feel like things aren't moving along quickly, or I'm not happy with some kind of coverage decision, right? I mean, we still see those types of things, often flag a really complex, kind of difficult claim. So customers are still kind of frustrated when they have to make that, make that call. But it still can, I think from the agent relationship standpoint, just having that outlet, having somebody who can advocate for you and kind of track down some information, ultimately, I think it can strengthen that relationship. But, it's a delicate balance there. Because if I'm reaching out to my agent and then they can't get back to me because they don't have access to information, I'm waiting a couple of days for them to follow up. That can be a frustration point too. So we still see that. There's still some opportunities, I think, to kind of strengthen that relationship there.
Okay, let's shift gears a bit and talk about the current environment. So we're in a very dynamic pricing environment, to say the least. We see some carriers pulling back on certain lines in certain markets. Steve, what's the role of the agent in this kind of environment where there's a lot of things happening and customers have a lot of questions, quite frankly?
Yeah, it's a great question and such a timely thing with all the things going on in our industry right now. I think the role of the agent has always been at least twofold. If you think about, they're the educator. And most of us as consumers don't really understand auto or homeowners insurance that well. When we want to know more about it, we typically go to an agent to learn more about it. And also, as Amy and Mark said, an advocate. So they're the advocate for that customer, and they're in the role that they play as an intermediary between the insurer and the customer. They'll advocate for both parties, but when it comes to how customers view the agent, they really see that agent as a strong advocate for them. And as of late, with the pricing activity, with the very strict underwriting criteria leading to some really historic actions, like completely pulling out of lines of business in certain states, agents have been called upon to do more of those roles of an educator and an advocate for consumers than they have in the past. And I think they've been called upon to have more of those tough conversations with customers than they have in the past. We just recently interviewed some agents for an hour-long one-on-one interview with some agents for a study we have publishing later this month on independent agent satisfaction. And we kept hearing from them the difficulties around stricter underwriting, the premium increases, and how they're getting a lot more questions and having more tough conversations with consumers than they're accustomed to having. You're kind of compressing maybe a decade's worth of tough conversations into the last 2 years. And agents are really feeling the brunt of that.
I think also one thing that's important to point out is that agents don't always automatically know why a customer's rates went up. So the more that insurers can explain to agents why the rates are going up and help them understand, that empowers the agents to then understand that and explain to the customer, and also help that customer maybe mitigate that impact. So whether that's adjusting their coverages or their deductibles or their limits, or minimizing their risk exposure, whatever that might be, the agent can really help them kind of mitigate the impact of those rate increases. Because let's face it, insurers kind of have to raise rates in this environment, otherwise they're not going to be profitable. But helping them understand why those rates went up is really critical.
Yeah, that's a good point, Amy. So let's shift gears one more time and look at the point of view of the agent themselves, what can carriers do to help the agents be better at their job and deliver a better customer experience? Steve, why don't we start with you, and then we'll go to Amy and Mark.
Yeah, sure. Well, I know we're going to go to Amy and Mark, but I would just say a couple things that Amy and Mark have already mentioned. So when it comes to premium increases, it's tough because most insurers' models bring a lot of variables into play to price any individual policy. So it's tough to really quantify the effect of any one change other than just rates are going up for customers. But to the extent an insurer can share more details with an agent and enable them to have that kind of conversation with a customer, or enable the agent to have some tools at their disposal to find ways to help mitigate some of the increase, because increases are just going to happen. As a consumer, we have to accept that's happening. Every insurer is increasing their premiums to catch up with the rising claims costs. And I think also, as we do our work with independent agents that we've been doing lately, I know this will probably tie into what Mark's probably going to be speaking to in a moment. A customer is less likely, as Mark said a few moments ago, to report their claim through an agent, but they still reach out to the agent when they feel like something is taking too long or just going wrong with their claim. And carriers can do a lot to help both the customer and the agent by providing more transparency into the claims process to an agent, knowing that agent is going to be the point of contact once something starts to go wrong in a claim from the customer's perspective. If they feel like the adjuster hasn't gotten back to me in 3 days, they said they'd call me 2 days ago, I'm going to call my agent to see what's going on, right? Or my car was supposed to be repaired in a week, it's been 3 weeks, what's going on? The body shop isn't giving me an answer I like, so I'm going to call my agent. The agents tell us when they have no transparency into the process, they're kind of left between a rock and a hard place, right? I want to help my customer, but I'm not aware of anything that's going on with the carrier or with the body shop, and I can't really get any information for them. So I think we're going to see, as time goes by, the leading carrier is going to do more to share some of that information with the agents, so that whether it's a pricing conversation, a claims conversation, or many of the other tough conversations that are happening with customers these days, that the agent is better enabled to do that. And I think one last point would be, we've talked a lot today about the tough conversations agents are having. I know that we've looked at some research, not that we've done, but another organization did, that 9 out of 10 employees in the U.S., when you ask them, they're not comfortable having a difficult conversation at work. And I think you can put agents into that mix, right? Even though their job is to communicate with consumers and work with the carrier, I think a lot of us just by nature kind of turn away from some of those tough conversations, and we're not going to be as apt to jump into that conversation with a customer for an agent when we know it's going to be a tough conversation. Your premium's going up 30%, or your claim is going to be delayed for this reason or that reason. And to the extent those carriers are helping agents, whether through training or some other mechanism, get better at becoming comfortable with those difficult conversations, and again, having a broader palette of tools to use with those difficult conversations, I think carriers can do a lot there to help enable agents as well.
Yeah, Amy, your thoughts? What else can carriers do to help agents be successful?
I tend to think about things such as, what can agents do to build, or what can insurers do to build relationships with their agents, because that in turn kind of makes for a strong foundation, and then allows the customer to kind of, or the agent to kind of think of that insurer first when they're thinking about quoting or placing business. So one of the things that we found in the study that Steve mentioned, our independent agent study, which publishes later in September, is that in-person interactions seem to mean a lot to agents. So, that's kind of the basis for building these relationships between agents and insurers. It is still a relationship business. And once COVID happened, it seemed like those in-person interactions kind of went downhill. That was by necessity, and that was okay at the time, but they haven't really come back up to the extent that we would think that they would by now. And not every interaction needs to be in person, but if you can make those interactions that are in person really meaningful and helpful to both parties, then the agents are significantly more satisfied and also more likely to say that, hey, this is an insurer that I'm placing more business with now than I was even just a year ago. So I think the in-person interactions is really key. And another thing that I've thought about is just making sure that agents are aware of all the customer-facing tools that insurers offer. So if they can, if they have customer facing mobile apps and claims tools and websites and stuff like that, if the agents are well aware of those tools and understand, how customers can access them and use them, then when a customer comes to them, the agent can not only fill them in on, whatever it is they're calling about, whether it's the claim status or something with their policy, but they can also direct them to some of these other tools and show them like, hey, if you want to be able to find this information out for yourself, Erie or whoever, whatever insurer offers these tools for you to access, and this is how you can find them. So I think keeping them up to date on customer-facing tools is important as well.
Mark, I know Steve touched on claims a bit, but anything you want to add in terms of how the insurers can help the agents when it comes to the claims process and experience?
Yeah, well, it's interesting because I think the two big things that were top of mind for me were both covered by Amy and Steve, right? So it's helping them understand the process, I think, and tools available. So educating the agents, because some of these processes are changing, pretty dynamically, right? You're rolling out new tools, new text alerts, things like that, or new photo appraisal processes, right? So keep the agents informed of these changes in the process so they can help educate the consumers, as Amy just mentioned, right? Sign up for these tools, speak about the benefits of them, right? Not only just things like telematics programs on the front end of the sales side, but in those servicing elements when you have a claim, things like that, so they can understand the benefits to help get the customers on board with some of these. And then, as Steve mentioned, right, better transparency in the process, right? So you hear about carriers giving them access to things like the claims notes, where they can just go in and just from just a read-only type of view, kind of see what's happening. Get access to the claims portals, things like that. So they're a little bit more educated when those consumers are calling in looking for updates. I think those are the two big things, that stand out to me in terms of, really helping, solidify that relationship.
And I think what's cool about the work we do is where Mark is to look at it from the customer perspective of when the agent isn't informed, how that impacts the customer. And I know, Mark, you see in your research that it's a tremendous impact on the customer when they're reaching out to their agent and the agent says, there's nothing I can do, I can't help you. And in the work that Amy and I have been doing recently, we look at the other kind of facet of that diamond or whatever. We say, okay, how does that impact the agent, him or herself? So we know that through Mark's work, massive impact on the customer, but the agent really does want to be the advocate. And when that information isn't being shared with them, whether it's around pricing or claims or anything else that is giving rise to those tough conversations right now, the insurer should really take another look at how can we better enable with information in this era of data that we have all around us. How can we get some of that data in the hands of the agent to better enable a better conversation, whether it be claims or pricing or any other topic that the customer brings to an agent?
And Steve, just before we wrap up here, you mentioned training earlier. Just curious, what kind of appetite do agents have for training, and if they do want training, what kind of training are they looking for?
Yeah, training. When you think about training, when we talk to agents about training, their mind goes right to the carrier is going to tell me about their product and their product set. When we ask agents, well, what do you value more? It turns out that product training, at best, doesn't harm the relationship, but in many cases actually harms the relationship between the agent and the carrier because they feel that either they already know the products well enough, they didn't need that training, or maybe it was not engaging training. But when we ask, well, what really is better training from a carrier, it really boils down to what helps them grow their business. And we know that through our decades of work in customer satisfaction, we know a more satisfied customer is a customer that is more likely to be retained, is less price sensitive, is much more likely to advocate for your brand, and your brand being your agency or your own personal name as an agent. And that really strengthens the growth of an agency or the individual agent, is having a more satisfied customer. So I think to the extent that carriers look into how do we train agents to give and deliver a better customer experience so that they end up being more satisfied, not just with the agent, but with the insurer that's writing their policy as well. You'll see both parties, you'll see all three parties benefit. The customer benefits from being more satisfied. The agent has a stickier customer that is more likely to be advocating for them. And so too does the insurer. The insurer has a customer that's more loyal, less price sensitive, and more likely to advocate for the insurer as well.
Well, Amy, Mark, and Steve, thanks so much for joining us today. And we want to thank our listeners as well, and we'll see you next time.